Hi everyone, Mike Holmes here. This is the Know Your Reno podcast, where listeners will hear from experts from Improve Canada.
Hi, my name is Olga, and I'm the host of the Know Your Reno podcast at Improve Canada. And today in the studio, virtually with us, we have David, the CEO of Renotag and partner at Clarity Construction, talking to us a little bit about the estimating process and why it's important to have accurate estimates as you are embarking on your home renovation journey.
Yeah, nice to be here.
I wanted to actually talk a little bit about the difference between, estimates and quotes. Are they different? Are they the same? Are they interchangeable? And how should your contractor go about that?
There's a big difference between what an estimate is and what a quote is. And it really does depend on the stage of the sales cycle. So usually what happens is the homeowner will call a contractor and they will arrange a time to speak with that contractor. Now the contractor will obviously push for a home visit or come to the house. They'll get to know you a little bit. We'll do some basic measurements and they'll be able to give you a best guess of how much the job should cost, right? And that's really what an estimate is. But to put together a quote is very different, right? A contractor needs to take this information back to their office, and they've got to run through whatever system they have in order to come up with an accurate number, right? So accuracy, I think, is the key difference here between what an estimate is and what a quote is.
So is like the estimate is, that sort of diagram on a piece of paper that a contractor might drop right on site and kind of give you like, this is what is going to be here and this is what is going to be there and this is what we think it's going to cost. And then you run that through some actual mathematical process to get to the final number.
Look, putting together a quote has been the same for 150 years, right? Ever since renovations were really a thing. Now, the way that that's done is very different from the different kind of contractor that you're going to approach. And you'll know the clear difference just on the way that they present something to you. It's funny because it's about 71% of renovations don't actually start with a broken down quote. They start off with a scribble on a piece of paper or in an email saying, here's what it's generally going to cost you to do the project. And there's a ton of problems with that, both for the contractor side and for the homeowner side.
So what are some of the problems that could arise from this sort of process? And, what's a way to rectify that?
See, my background is in construction, right? So for the last 6 years, I've done tons of different kinds of projects. Well over $20 million of construction projects, hundreds, if not thousands of different customers that we've interacted with. So everything really from new builds of homes and custom homes in Toronto to, one-off kind of projects like a kitchen. And really what it comes down to is the way that you address the client, right? And the trust that you're building with the client. When you are a professional at what you do, your client will expect the same. And this is primarily the reason as to why clients shop around. Homeowners should shop around because they should be educated in the way that they make purchasing decisions. But contractors should be able to represent themselves clearly and transparently because that's the number one way to build trust. And trust is what gets you a contract, right? Yes. But without a quote, there is no business. That's really why everything starts with that, the estimate or the quote. Now, the way traditionally that this will work is that a contractor, he'll know in his mind or she what the actual price should be, generally speaking. So they'll be able to, within minutes, kind of put something down on a piece of paper and give that to you. Whether or not it's accurate, always great question. 90% of the time, it's not going to be because material prices fluctuate, trades prices fluctuate. So how do they know what's the difference between what they think the material and the labor will cost versus what it actually does in the market, right? And that's why you have companies like Renotag that really do solve these kind of problems. So what we do, for example, at Renotag is we've put together a tool that takes a process of, let's say, 3 hours for quoting the project and bring it down to 3 minutes. So something that used to take 3 hours, meaning research the price of the materials that go into something, calculate out everything inside Excel, write out all of the descriptions that go with that, and then put that into a document that is ready to send to your client. That is done now in 3 minutes. And we do that with AI. That's a fantastic thing. So what a homeowner should look for is, from a contractor, is transparency, meaning things are broken down into line items. The descriptions associated with what needs to necessarily go into the project, and the cost associated to that. So those 3 things give you transparency, and then they build trust with the homeowner. And at the end of the day, as somebody that's hired contractors and it has been a contractor for 6 years, I want not the best price. I want the guy that I can trust, because this is my number one asset, my home. And if I can't trust you, then I cannot work with you.
What are the elements that are important to have in quotes, other than the description and the price, that a homeowner can really use to establish trust with a contractor?
Okay, so it comes down to what the homeowner looks to do inside their project, right? You have multiple inputs that can go into it. But let's just use an example. Let's say, what do you want to renovate today? I'll go. You want to do a kitchen?
Well, I would love to renovate my kitchen, actually.
So let's say you do a kitchen, right? Where do you want to start? Right? You probably want to start at some sort of design phase. Maybe you have an idea of what you want in your mind, but you don't necessarily know how it would look like, what will go into it.
Yeah. I want to rip out my oak cabinets and put in new ones. That's like number one thing, if you ask me.
Right. Now, how about the things that go with the cabinetry, right? Because if you're going to do the cabinets, then you got to do the backsplash, because it's going to be behind the cabinetry, and cabinets are not going to fit the same. Then you're probably going to want to do some electrical work, maybe just a little bit, because nowadays you have, under cabinetry lighting, valence lighting, right? And obviously you're going to want to do some countertops.
Yes.
Right. Maybe the hardware that goes with the cabinetry as well. If it's soft close, maybe the kind of knobs and the handles, right? So all of that needs to be discussed with the client. So if you want to do your kitchen and you're thinking about cabinetry, really, that's what it comes to mind for you. But you need your contractor, as a professional in your space, to explain that to you. So here's all the other things that also go into this, and here's how it will look like. And then you can get into the details.
And so when we are looking at that, and, we've gotten a quote from our contractor, we're like, okay, this is what I want. I want the countertops, and I want the cabinetry, and I want the backsplash. What are some of the red flags that homeowners should be aware of as far as, hiring contractors, getting quotes? Let's talk about that. That's everyone's favorite topic.
Yeah. That's a fun topic and a not so fun topic. Well, if, I would say the red flag starts with the way that you have the interaction with the contractor, right? If the contractor is he's gated, he's not open, he's just saying, yeah, no problem, we'll do this, we'll do that, no problem. But the transparency factor as to actually what goes into it is not there. That's a huge red flag. Like that's a non-starter. Now let's move it to the next step. Okay. Let's say they're getting to know you a little bit, but they're primarily focused on the price. Now that's another really big red flag, because that contractor either doesn't have his own team, right? And he's trying to just focus on price so he can make money, or he doesn't actually know what everything's going to cost. So he's breaking down a really high price for you so that he will make sure that he makes some level of a return or a margin on your product. Now, that's I would say number 2. Number 3 is that the quote doesn't necessarily come broken down, right? And this is by the way the biggest problem in this space. It needs to be broken down for both the homeowner and the contractor. It's like buying a car, right? If you're going to buy a car from the lot, it's very different from buying a used car. And for your house, you're not buying a used car, you're buying from the lot. So you want to go into the place, right? You want to come in and you want to know exactly what is going into the car, all the features, the kind of wheels, the kind of gas, the kind of engine. That is broken down for you, right? And everything comes transparent with the price. So you need the same thing in what you get as an estimate. And this is the trend nowadays, right? With more modern contractors, they're providing this, right? But the thing to look out for there is transparency in what is actually going into that. Because it's one thing to just say, okay, cabinetry, this much money, this kind of cabinet. How about the actual work that goes into that cabinetry? Is it supply and installation, or is it just the cost of the cabinetry, right? And then if it is supply and installation, maybe there's something else that goes along with it. Have you chosen the different materials? Have you chosen the different styles? And all of that beautiful stuff that goes into that. So I would say that's number three in terms of the big red flag to look out for. If your contractor all around is not being transparent with you, or they are not showing you really the work that's going to be going into this, and they're primarily focused on closing the deal, that's probably not somebody you should trust.
A lot of the time throughout the process of, picking and hiring, going through the estimating process to getting a quote, sometimes the numbers you get are entirely different, right? What you saw in the estimate is not what you see on the quote. What are some of the factors that play into that? And is there an acceptable way or an acceptable range that this could differ? And how do you go about mitigating that for the customer?
There are many reasons as to why a price of something can differ, right? So some contractors work with different suppliers, for example, if it's cabinetry, let's say for a kitchen, right? And that's important because the supplier of the cabinetry is going to have obviously an effect on the price point, right? Sometimes they don't actually do the installation themselves, right? And that's a big thing. If they do the installation themselves and they come at a high price, it's probably because there's a quality difference in the cabinetry versus what somebody else wants, right? And that's really where, going back into the previous question, you want to really get to know the kind of materials and the units that are going into any renovation, right? Because homeowners might not know this, but there are many different types, right? From everything from drywall to the flooring. You might look at it and say, this is the style that I want, and that's the the overall image. But it's also important to know the material itself, right?
Yeah.
So material price differences is a big one. And labor price differences is also a big one. And now the last one would be simply just margin, right? Because the contractor is also a business. He's there to make sure that you are happy, right? And I think that's very important. And he's there to work with you. But you also have the component of they're a business. They need to make money. They need to make sure that they can continue to make other clients happy as well, right? So the way that we, for example, handle that at Renotag is we will do the research for the contractors. So our system is constantly being updated with the cost of material and labor in the region. So a contractor can essentially get a quote instead of an estimate in a matter of minutes. The client is happy because the client gets an actual quote from the contractor. And the only thing they now have to focus on is what exact materials they want to use in the project. That's it. And those are the kind of, I would say, innovations that are happening in this space. We've got all kinds of different innovations happening in this space. So it's a very exciting time because you'll see all kinds of different stuff coming up.
I'm Mike Holmes. I've been trying to educate people on how to build it right, how to prioritize your renovations, and how to pick products and materials that will last. We love speaking to the Improve experts about how they are supporting the skilled trades. This is important to us, and it takes a whole community to stand behind the effort. Visit improvecanada.com to start your home improvement project the right way. Subscribe to the Know Your Reno podcast to learn more about how to renovate it right. And if you do see me at Improve Canada, please come by and say hi. Hope you enjoy the podcast and keep making it right.
Now that we're coming out of COVID-19, which I know was a great time to be a contractor or to do any sort of home renovation with all of the supply chain issues and all of that, we've seen a lot of customers unhappy throughout the process of starting from the lumber shortage of 2020, moving into the current supply chain issues. How has that impacted the sort of final numbers that we're now seeing from contractors or even hiring contractors as a whole?
Many things are different from the perspective of materials. And material prices are always fluctuating, right? There are certain events in time that will, let's say, cause them to hyper fluctuate, like a COVID-19 pandemic or increase in taxation on something like lumber, or a certain amount of companies that actually control the lumber space, having an influence in that. There's all kinds of stuff. But when it comes down to overall, a renovation yesterday is not going to be the same as a renovation tomorrow, right? So in clarity construction, for example, when we'll give a proposal or a quote to a client, right, we will make sure that there is an expiration date on that. Because if we don't, we'll know that in 6 months from now, if a client decides to move forward with us and say, hey, you know what, I liked how you guys worked. You guys were professional and you gave me all of this upfront value. And now you want to sign, fantastic. But we need to actually take a look at our numbers to make sure that they're reflective of what's going on in the space. And frankly, the time that we live in today, prices are going up across the board for everything from food to all kinds of different product and materials, and labor as well. Just as an example, for plumbers, a plumber used to be about 300 or 400 a point. And this is like 3-4 years ago. And today they're 800, right? And that's just how the industry progresses over time.
And I think we've definitely seen that a lot of that in, the recent couple of years. And there's been so many changes happening so fast that a lot of consumers may not be aware of if they're not part of the industry, if they're not, in it and knowing the nitty-gritty details. And what are some of the ways that we can sort of mitigate that and maybe educate the consumer about some of the challenges that the industry is currently facing?
There's an expression, if everyone knew everything, there would be no business. Because really what business is at the end of the day is somebody knows something better than you do, and they're able to make money off of that. So if a homeowner wants to be their own project manager, for example, and not hire a contractor, they should be well prepared with the experience that a contractor has in order to do that kind of project, right? And some do that very successfully, right? Like my parents, right? They don't like hiring an all-in project manager. They prefer to manage their own projects, but it's because they have that experience, right? And they've taught themselves that over years, and many different properties they've gone through. But an average homeowner that does not have this experience, but for example has a financial or accounting background, right? It's difficult to necessarily know the intricacies that go into a construction project. So if you do want to educate yourself, then Google is your best friend, but you got to know what you're looking for, right? And the best way to think about it is to break it down into something like a first principle, right? If I want to do a cabinet renovation, right? Like what you said for your kitchen, if I want to replace my cabinetry, what are the core points that go into that, right? And then you figure out the individual components of that. So if it's cabinetry, then there's also not just the cabinetry themselves, but the material of the cabinetry, the facing of the cabinetry, the labor to install it, the demolition of the existing, and disposal, which is a very important one, the site protection of the area so nothing gets damaged, right? And then all of the other things, like the hardware that goes onto the cabinetry, the backsplash, like we mentioned, and all the other things that go around it. And once you do that and you kind of map that out, then you can see the real beauty of what a professional contractor does for you, right? So they take on a very big project and they streamline that, right? And that is worth the money every day of the week.
Absolutely. And you made a really excellent point, when you said things like demolition and disposal. When we're thinking about a renovation, we're thinking about all of the new pretty things we're going to put in our space. But there are costs associated with things like demolition and disposal, right? Is this something that a homeowner should also be looking for in their quotes as they are working through the contract?
The last step is the contract, right? So in the contract, that's where you're looking for those kind of things, right? The details associated with how the actual engagement of the contractor and the homeowner is going to look like, right? But things like demolition and disposal should be inside a quote or an estimate, really, because anytime that there's something inside the home that needs to be taken out of the home, there's of course a cost associated to that. With the labor of actually doing that, making sure that the space around it is clean and not damaged, and then the actual disposal of those materials.
And I think that's something that a homeowner really needs to understand is that there are they're not hidden fees, right? But they're not the obvious ones that you think about when you are thinking of home renovation. You're thinking of labor, you're thinking of materials. You're not necessarily thinking of the costs associated with your old space, right? Because the whole point is to make that brand new again. And I think it's really important for consumers to know that there are costs that you may not have anticipated necessarily, especially if you're creating a budget on your own without the help of something like Renotag or a contractor. You need to be aware that there are going to be costs that you may not know about.
Yeah, and that's really why I'm bringing up the contract now, right? Because there is the problem, and going back to a red flag that you mentioned earlier, there is a problem in this space where contractors will have extra fees after the fact. Now, there's a big difference between an extra fee and something like an allocated line item, right? Or an allowance. For example, the material cost of tile. Okay. So we put in an allowance item based on the kind of material that you're looking for. And then you and I will go and we'll choose the kind of tile at the store, for example, or we'll have a representative at one of the stores. The suppliers come to us with a bunch of samples. And then there's a difference in that price point. It's either more or less of what we budgeted for the contract, right? Now, the way that is distributed at the end of it, that's a separate thing from extras, right? And what we're talking about now, for example, is an extra, where there are certain things that are not foreseen by the contractor once the job starts. For example, behind the wall, if we're going to open up a drywall, we're going to see mold. It's a big problem, especially in older cities, and it happens all the time. Or asbestos happens all the time, and that stuff needs to be removed because it's not to code, right? So those kind of things happen. But then there are things like, hey, I didn't include that in the actual quote, and now you're gonna have to pay for it. That's the problem. And why do I bring that up now and not before as a red flag? Because that's the kind of thing that should be outlined in the contract itself, right? In the contract, if a contractor does not have at least a couple sentences about that, talking about there are unforeseen circumstances, and this is how we generally deal with it. For example, change orders, which is if we want to change something on the project, here's how it will be changing. Or if we want to add something to the project, here's how it would look like. And the things that happen, like the extras that are unforeseen, that's a big red flag. But this only comes into the actual contract stages where the contractor and the client will sit down before you actually close and you talk about the different things that should happen. And if they do happen, how do we deal with it together?
So now I do want to talk a little bit about Renotag because, that's a service that's fairly new on the market. And I want you to tell us a bit about what the components are. Why is this could be such a game changer for the industry, and why, like you said, you're going from 3 hours to 3 minutes, which time is money at the end of the day.
Like I mentioned before, in my career, I've done over $20 million of projects. And I can tell you as an expert, that the biggest problem we face as contractors is building a quote for a customer. Without a quote, we can't win business, right? And that's really why we take hours to research and prepare a quote. And frankly, we don't even know if we'll get that job. But that's exactly why we built Renotag, because it helps the contractor and the homeowner. And we do this by automating that quoting process. So with Renotag, what used to take 3 hours now takes 3 minutes. And we're able to do this with really the modern tools of AI and data. And frankly, what ends up happening today is that a contractor will take all of that information and they'll do it manually. And the homeowner will have to wait hours, if not days, to get something back. But with this, you skip the estimate process and you go straight to the quote, and it's done for you. And all the contractor needs to do is make some small changes. Say, if the homeowner wants a specific thing and it's not in a tool like Renotag, and I'll give you an example, like framing a specific area, super custom. So the contractor, only he needs to do now is add that as a line item, and that saves them hours. And all of the numbers are based off of material and labor in the industry, and it's regionally based. So as a homeowner, it's extremely valuable to you because you get that with transparency up front. As a contractor, it helps you build trust. So there's really nothing else to say about that. It's a fantastic service. We actually launched it about 30 days ago. We already have over 200 contractors that are using our tools today, and that's in Ontario alone. And frankly, we're growing like crazy. So it's a good place to be. Yeah. And there's over 5 million home improvement contractors in North America, and really they're all looking for a better way to quote.
Incredible. Congratulations. That's huge growth. And I do think you're absolutely correct. It is going to be a game changer for the industry, especially you're streamlining the process. You know, there's more transparency, and we've talked about transparency, how important that is. And I think if you can give the homeowner, you know, the kind of peace of mind that this is what it is and not anything that's outside of the realm of possibility and the realm of what it should be, I think it's really going to bring a lot more transparency and trust to the industry as a whole.
That's right. It's a really big issue, actually, across the board, really across the world. And cities don't really have a way to mandate it. They have kind of registrations. You know, you have to register with us to be a contractor, and there are, you know, general laws that outline how certain things should be. But unfortunately, when it comes to mature spaces like construction, there's only so much that can be done without completely disrupting the space. And then you have systems like Renotag that come out and really bring innovation into the space. And like I said before, when it comes to construction, it's a business the same as everything else. And the number one thing about business is transparency. And if you are able to provide that transparency to both the homeowner and the contractor with a one-stop solution, it's a winner.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, David. It was such an informative discussion, and I really look forward to seeing all of the innovations that, you know, Renotag is going to do in the space and how that all progresses.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Know Your Reno. If you would like to get in touch with today's speaker or any of our large number of showrooms at Improve Canada, please check the description for a link to book an appointment with us at Canada's largest home improvement center. Don't forget to keep in touch with us on our socials, and we will see you next week for another value-packed episode to make your next home renovation a breeze.